little bit slow on the hobble this morning. Beginning with the people's testimony. This is by an ancient philosopher and poet from the 6th century BC. Now, and his name is Theonis. Now, 6th century BC, keep that in your mind as we proceed here. Let us devote our hearts to merriment and feasting, while the enjoyment of delights still brings pleasure. For quick as thought does radiant youth pass by, nor does the rush of horses prove to be swifter. And that would be pretty fast, because 6th century BC, probably the fastest thing anybody knew of was a horse. Moving on to the testimony of the traditions, Ecclesiastes, and my readings indicates that this section, at least this section of Ecclesiastes, was written in between the 5th and the 2nd century BC. So note that the words of Theonis would have been written in that same time frame. What do people get in this life for all their hard work and anxiety? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, their minds cannot rest. It is all meaningless. So I decided there is nothing better than to enjoy food and drink, to find satisfaction in work. Then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God, for who can eat or enjoy anything apart from him? The word of the Lord.
Thank you, Walter. So I've received some feedback from you all about Ecclesiastes, and I'm very grateful for it. Some of you have said, it's all right. Others, I thought it would be better. I don't get why you like this so much. And it's all fair. It's all fair. But this is my favorite Hebrew Bible book, and today is really what I consider to be why. Because we get to talk about the nuggets. We dealt with the hard parts. Why our author, Qoheleth, I'll call him Q throughout, keeps saying life is meaningless. What's the point? Life is absurd. And in order to get to the nuggets, you have to wade through that. He's deconstructing a very simple worldview that he had, where if you do the right thing, you're rewarded. If you do the wrong thing, you're punished. And if not in your lifetime, you can expect it to happen to your kids or your grandkids. And that's fair. That is what a fair, ordered universe looks like. And Q lives long enough to see, yeah, that's not how it goes for everybody. In fact, that's not how it goes for a lot of people. Quit telling me that everything works out. It doesn't all work out. So, how do you live? How do you live when you're faced with absurdity? How do you live when you're not convinced that life's going to work out? How do you live when you can't just boil life down to an easy, simple equation? Good action plus good action equals wealth. Bad action plus bad action equals cancer. It just doesn't work like that, right? These are what I get to share with us. In the midst of his cynicism, we find how he finds meaning in his life, how he is able to find what is significant, how he finds the points to living when faced with no points. And why is this, I think, good news for us? Because we live in a cynical age ourselves. And so many of us have found that the worldview we were given or that we inherited also doesn't work out so simply. I also think our writer may be having some struggles with depression and anxiety. And some of us can relate to that. I can relate to that. So, for this, I'm going to need some help. When we were dealing with this book last time, I had one whiteboard. This morning, Tub greeted me by saying, "Hello, Professor." And now we've got 2 whiteboards. So it's going to be twice as academic. No, I'm not able to boil everything down to as succinct nuggets as before. They're going to be sentences, whereas before it was words. So Blair is going to help me out. All right, now, when you take preaching class, intro to preaching, they tell you a good sermon has 3 points. I have found that a great sermon often has 1 point that's just well communicated. And today we're going to have 10 points. So make of that what you will. So what is sensible? How does our author view the sensible when faced with nonsense? Quite simply, he sees it as satisfaction. Satisfaction. Your head hits the pillow that night and you're like, this was good. This is good. You don't have to write that down yet. And he starts us off with wisdom. Now, this one sounds familiar because you're like, you already talked about how pointless wisdom was. Well, he puts wisdom into its proper framing. If wisdom is only meaningful because it's going to get you all of the promises that other people have attached to it, and you can put good living here, you could put smart living here, you could put prudent living here, all of that's what he has in mind as wisdom. You know, living smartly because you're also in sync with the heart of God, all of that is what he sees as wisdom. But if wisdom is only worthwhile because you get an assurance of reward, then it's not worthwhile. We can't associate wisdom with a guarantee of promises, a guarantee of reward and good things. And that means that we have to stop considering wisdom as a way to get what we want from life. Wisdom is not going to be fruitful if we're only concerned with controlling our lives, controlling the future. All right? And I think that we have to look at that because a lot of our attempts to live well are our attempts to control the future, right? So we have to make some level of peace. A lot of this is just out of our hands. Okay, we got to be in today, not in tomorrow. It doesn't mean that we just engage in wanton foolishness, self-destructive behavior. It means we ought to consider wisdom just because it's going to be less self-inflicted harm. That's what he keeps bringing us back to. You are less likely to hurt yourself when you are trying to live prudently. That's his point. You cannot control other people's behavior, though. You cannot control the future. You cannot control even your own health. Not 100%. Maybe not even 70%. Perhaps not even 25%, but maybe a little bit. You drink enough water. That's wise. All right, I'm trying this thing out, but it keeps going to sleep on me. So, Blair, I keep trying this, and I gotta I gotta crack the nut on how to use the Kindle up here. Blair, point number 1. And let's do it on this board, because we read this way, right?
All right.
How do we live sensibly? How do we find satisfaction in this life? Well, number one, wisdom equals less self-inflicted suffering. Less suffering. Yeah, do you see why I need the two boards? I can't boil that into one word. Okay, and I also, I think we need to remember, this is a properly bounded wisdom. This is wisdom with proper expectations. If your expectation of wisdom is up here, bring it down to here. This makes sense when you have the right expectations around it. Point number 2 goes right along with it. Accept that we cannot control the future. Why does our author keep bringing up the unfairness that happens in life? Why does he keep bringing up death? Is it just to get us down? I think it's because he wants to break the reader of the notion that we can control the future. As long as we keep thinking that we can, we're going to be unsatisfied. How many of you have found that to be true in your life? Right? Eventually, you just don't get what you want. We all get our own fair share of trouble. Number 3 is the inverse of this. So if number 2 is accept that we cannot control the future, we got to stop living or trying to live in the future, we got to be in the now. Number 3 is stop living in the past. Nostalgia. Nostalgia is toxic. Now, this is not I really enjoyed that movie because I had this great memory with it. It's not saying memories are toxic. It's that we got to let go of this sense that everything was better before, and so we are fixated on the past. So I have a friend she hates everything modern. Everything modern. I've had to work with her on projects, and she's like, I hate computers, I hate cell phones, I put mine in a box when I come home every night. I have to use it for work. There's part of me that really respects that, and another part of me that's like, this is a little inconvenient. She thinks everything was better when we had to use typewriters. And we had 3 channels. The last good movie that came out was in the 90s. And at first I thought, oh man, what a ridiculous person. She's just being a fuddy-duddy. Maybe she just wants to be a contrarian. And then I learned that her partner died in the 90s. So nothing's ever been better than it was in the 90s for her. Our writer tells us that nostalgia is a lie. And I think objectively, perhaps it is, but in her lived experience, subjectively, it's true. And I find a certain beauty in that. Like WandaVision says, what is grief but love persevering, right? There's some beauty there. But it can be a trap. It's really hard to find satisfaction in today if we can't ever move out of our fixation on the past. Right? Number 4. We're moving from be in the now, from don't be in the future, don't be in the past, be in the now. Now we are at enjoyments that can be gained today, okay? We're in the present, finally. And this is enjoy work. How can anyone say such a thing, right? Now, I am going to point out, Q finds a lot of satisfaction in toil, in hard work. He'll also say, what you get for your hard work does not make life in and of itself meaningful, because you could spend your whole life being a workaholic and never be able to enjoy what you've produced. If you spend your whole life trying to earn something, and then you die, he considers that a great tragedy. So work in and of itself doesn't make life meaningful. But if you can find enjoyment in work, it makes it more satisfying. Everything keeps coming back to that. I also want to point out, though, that Q has described himself as a member of royalty. So, let's also put this in the proper bounds. He's not speaking as somebody who's laboring on the farm day in, day out. He's not speaking as a slave. He owns slaves. I wonder if his slaves would say, oh, there's nothing better than a good day's work, working for good old Q. And yet, in the hundreds and hundreds of years since this book was written, it's a regular part, an annual part of the Jewish calendar to have these words shared during harvest season. So whether or not I agree with, Q, you've got your problems. You're a problematic person, Q. Millions of people throughout the years have found great wisdom in trying to seek enjoyment in the work that they do. And I think that's key. Seeking the enjoyment. We've all done jobs that we hate, right? How do you get through the day? I think if we're not seeking enjoyment in it, everything just becomes so much worse. Sometimes we have that one coworker, right, who makes it more bearable. Or the commissary has that one food item that is not the total worst. I don't know. Wherever you can find some life-giving enjoyment in it, do so. And here is another uncomfortable reality around work. Keep in mind, right? He is an elderly gentleman at this point. I think he's also writing from the perspective of somebody who does not have much work left to do anymore. And when we're on the other side of our careers, those of us who are lucky enough to retire, we find ourselves in a similar situation, right? Sometimes we miss being busy with those things, or we miss that sense of satisfaction when the day's work is done, or having a regular calendar. I don't know, whatever it is that was the thing that you missed. I think you could probably relate to some of what Q's saying around hard work, right? Which brings us to point number 5. This one's also an easier one. And let's make it the last one we put on here. Okay. Enjoy food and drink. Now, keep in mind, he's saying, let's not be completely foolish in our self-indulgence. You know, our Puritan ancestors would say, all things in moderation, and I don't know. Maybe they've read this book and they're like, I don't know about all of this, but maybe we could temper some of what Q's saying by saying that. He sees nothing better. This is a phrase he repeats 3 times in the book. There is nothing better for humans, in his perspective, than enjoying their toil and enjoying good food and drink. There has been a movement in the last 20 years that I've noticed. I'm sure it existed long before I noticed it, called mindful eating and mindful drinking. Have you ever heard this? Yes. Yeah. This is when we just simply take the time, we slow down, and we notice. We notice what we're consuming. How does it taste? How does it feel? How does my body react to it? Is this pleasurable? Is this painful? Is this both? should I never eat this thing again? You know? I'm not much of a wine drinker, but this is something I see wine connoisseurs do. And I wonder how much of wine culture is just simply slowing down enough to actually notice what you're drinking. I don't know. I slow down and try to notice it. I'm like, this tastes red. This one tastes less red. But I think there's something to that. Do we allow ourselves to find satisfaction in the things that we need to survive? And I think that, once again, it is something that has to be done with intentionality for many of us. We have to intentionally slow down. I really enjoy this steak. This bread, it's actually really good bread, right? All right. Number 6, enjoy other products of your efforts. So he mentions, there's other really nice things that can be enjoyed from our hard work. Clothing, and keep in mind, in this time period, even royalty didn't have closets as full as ours. So clothing, entertainment, celebrations with people you care about. Enjoy that. How many of us feel guilty whenever we spend money on just about anything? Okay, some of us, thank you. I'm like, the more work I do on my own mental health, the less guilty I feel about it. I'm a people pleaser, if you're wondering how my anxiety shows up, and I want to make sure I'm not depriving the rest of the family if I buy a shirt that doesn't have holes in it, And this never comes from Stephanie. This is like, Stephanie's always like, we have a budget for that. Could you get clothes that don't have holes? What sacrifice do you think you're making for our family here? Just do it. Oh. And then wouldn't you know it, I get it, and I feel comfortable in it. It's nice. We're allowed to enjoy those things. Number 7. And as a people pleaser, this one is one of the hardest for me. I'm growing in it. Let go of how other people see us. If you want to find satisfaction in life, according to Q, we have to let go of that. He says, and I want to get this right, if we wish to be satisfied in our lives, we must release what other people say about us, for we ourselves have often said hurtful things about others. Ugh. And in this section, he's like, he paints this image of like, quit putting your ear to the door to listen to like how everybody else in the palace is talking about you. Don't do that. Stop it. I need to hear that. As long as we find our satisfaction in the opinions of other people, we can expect dissatisfaction with ourselves. Number 8, maintain supportive relationships. We need to not find all of our significance in how other people see us. But we also have to recognize that we need other people. And one of the most beautiful chapters in this book, one of the most beautiful sections, is when he's talking about life in community with others. And it is a bit jarring because Q is fiercely individualistic, right? And part of why that characteristic is so jarring is because most of our writings are written with a real communitarian sense. This is what's best for everybody, not just you, right? So when he gets to this section, he sees that it is good for us and it is good for others when we recognize that we need each other. We are better together than apart. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. And if one falls, then the other will lift them up. But woe to the one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. It is really frustrating, so frustrating, to live in community, okay? We have difficult people. Every single day we run into these difficult folks, right? And it could be so easy for us to say, I don't need anybody. I'm just going to hole up in my little dungeon, and I'm going to enjoy my own company because I'm the best, and everybody else just kind of sucks. But it's a trap. At least to Q. To Q, it's so dangerous. Because what happens when we get sick? What happens if we fall down? Right? He's not just talking physically, of course. He's talking about just the random things that happen in life. It's better when we can show support for other people and they can show support for us. And this is a pretty equal relationship he's talking about here. He's not talking about us being, the sole supporter. We never need any help. We're always the helper. We're never the helpee. He's recognizing that even he, this member of royalty who's got it pretty good, even he needs help. And even he gets to help. Life is better in supportive relationship. I do want to make a quick point about romantic partners in this. We have to recognize that in the ancient world, people didn't get married for the same reasons we do. It's a matter of survival or politics, And he says at one point, enjoy the partner of your youth. And it's one of the only places in the Bible that we see somebody mention that you should enjoy your partner. I find that real special. But I also want to point out, though, he's not saying get all of your worth from your partner. He does not have this worldview where we find all of our significance and meaning in that partnership. He just says enjoy it. Enjoy it. Just throwing that out there. The angsty teen part of me that grew up hearing way too many love songs has to remember that, In 14 years of marriage, this has been something that Stephanie and I have adjusted our expectations on, right? It's not up to Stephanie to make me feel significant. And it's not up to me to make her feel like life matters. We are in partnership with one another. We support one another. We get to enjoy one another and the lives that we've built. But it's an unfair burden if I draw all of my sense of meaning out of her. And number nine. This is another one that I also have to keep hearing over and over and over again. Do we have any perfectionists in the room? Do we have any? Raise your hand if you kick yourself for just failing at something or making a mistake. Yeah. Sometimes, okay, all right. So we have different relationships with perfection, I hear in this room. And I'm glad. I'm a perfectionist. I'm especially a relational perfectionist, which is the term I went off of before I knew that I was a people pleaser. I just want my relationships to all be perfect. Giuseppe, why are you doing all of the 300 pages of reading this week in class? Well, I don't want the professor to be upset with me. The professor does not care. What do you mean? She'll know. She does not care. If your reason for doing 300 pages of reading is for the professor to like you, maybe don't do that, right? Why are you working so hard at Capital One, Giuseppe? Well, I like it when my bosses like me. I like it when my coworkers like me. But there's another side to it too. I fear failure. I feel a sense of embarrassment and shame when something doesn't go the way I planned on it going. And I think this is what our writer has in mind when he gets to his most controversial statement yet in this book. Are you ready for this? It's a truly surprising passage. Do not be too righteous, and do not act too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be too wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other, for the one who fears God shall succeed with both. And on the face of it, this sounds like Q is saying, have you considered being just a little foolish? Maybe you should try just a tad of wickedness, you know? Right? Like life is a sampler platter, and you're pulling a little bit of the good, and you're pulling a little bit of the bad. And this was really confusing to me. But our writer starts off this confounding section by saying, don't be too wise, don't be too righteous, and destroy yourself. We are fallible creatures. We make mistakes. It is part of the human stew. And so we have to accept that. We have to accept ourselves. That's really what I think he's talking about here. And we have to accept that we are not perfect. We are imperfect. We make mistakes. And if we can accept this about ourselves, we are going to live a more satisfying life. It is immensely unsatisfying to expect perfection and fail to live up to it, isn't it? Right? Number 10. So, self-acceptance instead of perfectionism. So number 10, make this one nice and big. This is the summary. Summary of it all. This can be found in chapter 9. If you're like, I don't want to read all 12 chapters of this book, but I do want to get the summary. Make sense out of nonsense by finding satisfaction in all we can today. So find satisfaction in all we encounter today. All that we can. This is the chapter that he drives home that we're going to die really hard. And he says, yeah, I don't know if there's an afterlife waiting for us, which is, again, one of those surprising things for many of us to find in Scripture. We have different perspectives of the afterlife in the Bible, and this is one of them. And what he sees ultimately as the point in living is to go from simply going through the motions to go from survival to thriving, to enjoy what we can day to day throughout our lives. Some of you have, thank you, Blair. Some of you have seen the bumper stickers like, have an attitude of gratitude. I have problems sometimes with us boiling all of life down to these little cliches, and this is one of those ones that could be quite dangerous. But I also think it can be a helpful life pursuit. We just maybe need to come to terms with the fact that it's going to be imperfect for us, right? We have to accept that we're not always going to be grateful for everything that comes our way, and maybe many days we shouldn't. You know? My dad, I mentioned, 20 years ago was quite sick, and I was worried he was going to die. And I heard people who tried to tell me, like, the blessing and all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. That's toxic nonsense. But many times we get through our most lonely chapters of life, our most painful episodes of life, by noticing that little blessing that we got to enjoy. Sometimes, if we can get past the need to control everything around us and accept that we just can't, sometimes what gets us through an absurd season is not the promise that everything's going to work out, but the little things that mattered that day. I'm talking about when you have a family member you love who's entering their last few days. And every moment, it's everything you can do to stop from crying. But you had that friend show up, right? You got that phone call. It doesn't balance it out. It doesn't make it all worthwhile in that moment, but it helps get us through. Now, none of this is a replacement for mental health care, therapy, medication. I'm somebody with anxiety. I take some medication. I am meeting regularly with my therapist. I say all of this because I know some of us in this room have felt shame around things like that. And these are not replacements for that. These are supplements for that, okay? And I hope it's as helpful for you in your lives as it's been for me and mine. All right, church, you've all been incredibly patient. I'm going to wrap this up by referencing the Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite quotes: get busy living or get busy dying. And I think that's a wonderful synopsis of Ecclesiastes.